Welcome to Cinematalkraphy. We watch movies with you so you don't have to.
Welcome to Cinematography. I'm your host, Roberto Vegas, joined by Mr. Brandt.
Hughes.
And we are recording here at the Alamo Drafthouse Slaughter Lane. And we just got out of the Hayao Miyazaki film, The Wind Rises.
That is a fact.
I'm going to preface this right now before we start getting into our discussion and kind of talk about this film proper. I am going to be very biased. I'm a huge Miyazaki fan. I've been since, I think my first one was Nausicaa, the Valley of the Wind. And obviously led into My Neighbor Totoro, Spirited Away, blah, 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 blah. Mm-hmm. Whereas you have only seen Spirited Away.
Correct.
So this is going to be a very interesting kind of review of the movie or sort of interpretation of it. Because I'm coming from a very much a well-versed anime background, well-versed in Japanese culture and things like that, whereas you may not necessarily be there.
Sure.
So let's go with you first. What was your kind of initial sort of take on the film?
I enjoyed it. Sure. It was a good movie. The thing that struck me most about it, and I know that Miyazaki kind of has a one of the descriptors that most often goes along with his films is whimsical.
Yes.
And I was really interested to hear if any of his other movies had kind of the ominous, dark clashing against the whimsical, like in this movie, which I really love.
That's what's the interesting thing, because usually it's not the case. I mean, there are certain tropes within Miyazaki films that occurs. Usually a flying sequence, usually very gorgeous animation. Just as him as an animator.
Sure.
But it's rarely does it tackle the dark. There are sometimes darker elements, especially with his earlier things, but it rarely does it tackle the dark and even have it, because this had, obviously we're set way more in the real. I mean, we are set in the real world, but we're set really firmly during. Again, the story, for those who have no idea, follows the creation of the Mitsubishi Zero, sort of one of the fighter planes that was in World War II for the Empire of Japan, and because of that, we're in a very different territory as a movie. One, and two, we're in a different territory as a director for Miyazaki. Because usually it's always, you're right about the whimsical part. There are always fantasy sequences. There are always these gorgeous kind of things. You're always traveling to a different world. Mm-hmm. And we got a little bit of that when we got into the dream sequences with Jiddo, and that's about it. Because once we got back in the real world, everything was pretty much bleak. Yeah. War is on the horizon. You have his fiancée infected with tuberculosis. Yeah. So I don't think that's been done in a Miyazaki film. It's a very rare thing to have that. But what I enjoyed about this film, my initial kind of thing is I'd gone in there kind of knowing a lot about this movie, a lot of the history of it, because when it came out in Japan, there was a lot of controversy around it on both sides. A lot of, one of the things that kind of happens when you release an anime like this, especially when it's on a very touchy topic like this, you get a lot of different opinions of this is just, Japanese imperialism, put in the films, or this does blah, 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 blah. There's a lot of politics around it. Because, again, it's about the guy that designed a very, very prominent warship. Not necessarily was his end-all, be-all thing. And I think that's what I like about this film a lot, is that what it shows at the end, especially when it comes to a lot of these creations, that's not the guy's. That wasn't his intent. At least, for the movie's sake. Like when he came, one of these things he really puts that front and center was when he was talking about the plane, kind of the new thing, saying, there's not enough weight for these guns. You should probably not put them on there. And everyone laughed around him, but he wasn't laughing. It wasn't a joke to him. He's like, no, this shouldn't be the way we're doing this.
Right. Yeah, I think that's thematically very important. My dad was a pilot. He flew a lot, so I kind of grew up with a not necessarily. I never wanted to be in that kind of industry, but I always kind of grew up with an appreciation for the love of aeronautics and stuff.
Right.
And this did a really good job of showing that. And there's a lot of themes of taking pure ideas and corrupting them.
Yeah.
and I think the story kind of follows that as we follow our protagonist who just wants to make awesome airplanes.
Yeah, I mean, it kicks in with him sort of literally running to borrow the aviation book for what it looks like it's from Mitsubishi, the sort of the company that made the planes, and he's just like reading. It's like it's in English. I'll have a dictionary. Don't worry. Like that's all he ever wanted to do. Like originally, it seems like all he ever wanted to do was be a pilot, like fly in his own. But much like myself and a lot of people, he was cursed with bad eyesight. And so, as opposed to that, he then becomes a sort of plane designer, the sort of fighter designer. And what I appreciated about it was that it really showed the innovation side. Like, it showed that being important, as opposed to because usually a lot of war movies will show the soldiers, will show the, or war, or movies, kind of themed around that will usually show, like, the valor of the, soldier or the valor of the pilot. Whereas this shows sort of the almost, creativity and artistry in an engineer. I mean, even, the way it was, I forget what it was that the dream French guy, which I can't remember, it was like Mr. Krotek or something like that. I can't remember what he said, but it was something about the idea of engineers create. And
right.
that was, the drive that eventually convinced, our main protagonist, Jiro, to do that. And I really dug that it did that, because it's very rare that they do that in any movies, period. I mean, I think the last time you ever see, whenever you see those sort of things, it's, left to things like The Aviator or, when you talk about Howard Hughes, it's never really about, here's the life of this guy and how he does it.
Yeah, I think that was pretty interesting.
What do you think about the animation?
I really enjoyed it. As someone who has done a little bit of animation and illustration and stuff like that, and even I guess going into my photography and video work, like it's hard to make every image kind of striking and fresh.
Yeah.
And this movie did that very well.
That's what I love about Miyazaki. It's sort of a thing that he does, sort of a thing Studio Ghibli does in general, but Miyazaki more importantly, because what I liked about this film, beyond it looking gorgeous, like every shot is gorgeous, every framed version was gorgeous, colors are bright, vibrant, everything was perfectly done. What I really dug about this movie is that there is no reason why it couldn't have been live action. It just because Miyazaki's medium is animation, that's why he animated it. And it's something that, because if it had been any other director, been like, let's live action, let's put some CG, let's do some effects. Like I was thinking in my head of like, this could have been green screen, this could have been that. But because Miyazaki is an animator, and because that is the medium he works in, that is what this film was. And it came from it felt like it came from a very honest place. Like that he realized that this man was a creator, much like himself. He just happened to work in, airplanes.
Yeah.
What do you think of the soundtrack? I realize I'm bouncing around the movie because it's such a, like, I think a Miyazaki film is almost encompasses all this, and that's sort of why I'm prodding you for that, because again, I'm biased as hell. I love this guy.
Yeah, I enjoyed the soundtrack. It didn't stick out to me at all, really. Like, there were a couple of moments where I was like, oh, this is a really nice moment where the soundtrack works really well with the imagery, but most of the time, I mean, there's actually a lot of just like silent bits and really quiet moments.
Yeah.
And I noticed that more than the soundtrack, which I guess maybe in a cinematography kind of sense, like, a good cinematographer is one that you don't notice. That's
the point. That's what I was going to try to get you at, talking about that, because what I notice a lot, and I guess this talks about me and my kind of sound obsession, I loved the sound effects for this film. Like, they all sounded like, especially when we went to the dream sequences, like where there'd be a normal like kaboom kind of crash, it'd be these sort of burp, burp, sort of like almost human sound effects of saying those things.
I felt like a lot of the sound effects were kind of a cappella.
Yeah.
And I thought that was kind of weird, but kind of cool. And then I just bought into it, so I stopped worrying about
And
it.
that's exactly what it was. I think that's what I liked so much about the film was that even when we're in a dream sequence, and the characters are like, we're in, it's a dream, so we can walk here, it's still a dream, but don't get your head cut off. Like we still accepted it as real. We just knew we were in a dream because it's it's this sort of green, lush green pastures and sort of roaming grass and all this sort of, very dream-like sequences, compared to what it was. But even when we're in the real world, like the point that I caught it at first was the minute the earthquake happened in Tokyo, you saw those sort of brrr, like it almost sounded like a monster attacking Tokyo. And I dug the way it did it because, the fire wasn't like burning. It was sort of like humming, like it's consuming everything.
Yeah, there were a lot of times where when it kind of speaks to that destruction and disaster, like you could almost hear like faint screams, like kind of distorted and echoed, and it was very interesting.
Now here's a question. When you saw Spirited Away, did you see it subtitled or dubbed?
I saw it subtitled.
Oh, okay, interesting.
I think. It's been a while.
That's okay. My question goes, I guess the thing is, how do you handle subtitle films? This is, some people believe that when it comes to subtitling, that it distracts from a movie, and some people believe that if you don't watch it subtitled, you're not getting the director's intended experience.
I really enjoy subtitled stuff. I think there can be good instances of dubbing, like Samurai Champloo.
Yes.
I think has really good dubbing.
I agree.
But, I guess one of the first movies I saw, at least in theaters with subtitles, was Inglourious Basterds, which I went into it not expecting that or knowing that. I kind of just knew that it was an awesome movie, and I didn't know a ton about it. And I remember that, that opening scene, there's a bunch of dialogue, and I was like, whoa, is this whole movie going to be subtitled? That's crazy. I had no idea. And then
they switched.
Yeah, and then there's bits and pieces that are subtitled, but yeah, I always really enjoy it. I think it helps me focus on the movie sometimes because I always have to be paying attention.
Yeah.
At least if I'm watching a movie at home, sometimes that can be difficult to do. In theaters, it's not as bad, but I think I have difficulties reading sometimes. Like I'm a super slow reader, and it takes a while for me to absorb the information. But in movies, you just kind of are forced to get a glance at it and understand the meaning as mixed with their actions, which I find is not really a problem at all.
Okay, I mean, some people, everyone has their own take, and I can go either way. Honestly, I feel that if it's subtitled, it's subtitled. If it's dubbed. As long as it's done well, and there are, in anime, those are few and far between, to be honest. But much like any other dub material, what I liked actually most about this was especially the opening sequence of the movie. Like, it went a good, I'd like to say 10, maybe even 15 minutes.
Without any dialogue.
Without any dialogue.
Yeah, that was pretty cool.
Like, it was cool because it would sort of, I was like, is this movie could be complete? Much like you thought when it came, is this movie simply subtitled? I was like, is this movie could be completely silent? Because that would be a complete departure for everything. Because I had no, the only knowledge I had of this film was sort of the history behind it and sort of the story behind the whole creation of the plane and everything else between that. But not, had no idea what Miyazaki was doing. Had no idea what to expect because, you see something like Spirited Away or Totoro or even Howl's Moving Castle. All of those are very whimsical. Like, there's some darkness to it a little bit every so often, but nothing, nothing. Everyone comes out okay. No one really dies. Everyone lives happily ever after, which is not so much the case here. But, and I think that's what I liked the most about it was that it felt very, very real. Yes, I mean, it's a real story, but I'm saying in the terms of the animation felt real, and it's something that, I don't know if you could have made this other way. As even I say, it could have been live action. I don't know if anyone else could have done this live action.
Yeah, I think it is. It feels like it was probably a personal enough project that I don't think anybody else would have done it as well.
Now then, okay, so let's kind of dig more into certain things. What was your sort of out of all the films so far? What was the scene that maybe struck you the most? Either what shot, what moment, what story fragment?
I just like the thing that lingers most is just like the way that some of those dream sequences turn, and you can tell like as the wind is picking up, and then like the sounds go to a darker tone, and things get really ominous, and you can feel the foreboding nature of it.
That's what I was interesting was that all the dream sequences, like it became for me hard to almost piece things together, because you could tell that there was a dream sequence, but that's actually what happened. Like specifically with his first sort of test with a fighter plane before he made his final design, that sort of classical kind of looking sort of thing. It's flying in the air, and then he cuts to a dream sequence where it's breaking apart, and we think it's a dream sequence. But as we cut to almost real life, it's like, no, that's what happened. Like that thing actually, collapsed on its own weight.
Right.
And a lot of the shots, anytime, like it's funny you say that, because anytime we enter a dream sequence, it's not very long until something gets destroyed. It's not something the dream kind of is cursed. I mean, that was sort of the theme about planes, is that they're a beautiful dream, but they're a cursed dream because, in the history of aviation, there has always been, a fighter, maybe not at the very beginning, but they've always been that lingering, we could do bombs, we could do, guns with this. That wasn't his, his intent. That was never his mission. And it's sort of funny, every time that he'd go to the dreams, there was always this dark one, even from the very get-go. When he's talking, when he first sees the planes, from the French design, Italian designer,
right?
They're fighter pilots, they're fighter planes. He's like, those are going to go to war, but they'll end it quickly. But they're still, they're still fighter planes.
Yeah.
Well, for me, if I had to say like a scene that struck me the most, I think it was actually that last shot. Like the last couple of shots, as the plane is taking off and about to land, something snaps in Jiddo. Obviously, at that point, his wife, I think it's Hanako, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
She's obviously headed back to that. We'll touch more on her disease in a second, but as she's heading back to the sanatorium to kind of get essentially go to her death, like it just completely goes silent. The wind picks up. And what I liked about that, now that you bring up the whole concept of the foreboding part in the dream sequences where the wind picks up and something happens, that mirrors real life at that point. The wind starts to pick up. And as the wind rises, I think we must live or something like that. But the idea that was always there being the wind was whenever that became the force, that was either the force that pushed you to where you needed to go, or pushed you along, or pushed something else where it needed to go, and whether or not takes you or not, that's neither here nor there. But I loved that shot because it was sort of it just all snapped together and hit him, and it's not where he's told about or anything like that. He just realizes what's happening. But what I did. There's some things I didn't like about this film, though.
Okay, well, before you do that,
go for it.
I just had a thought
about
the symmetry of effectively the two the two elements, the two major elements in the movie, which is the developing of the planes and the love interest.
Correct.
Basically, and as you were talking about the wind, I was thinking about how the wind was always the element that brought the two together, whether it was the wind taking up the hat, whether it was the wind taking up
that's a good point. I forgot about that
umbrella. And then I realized that their relationship was effectively the same as his relationship with planes, wherein it starts off as basically a doomed fate for something wonderful, where they fall in love and then she gets terribly ill.
That's a good point.
And then the planes are wonderful, and then they go to
the death. Yeah, that is a good point. I didn't even see that, because you're right. As it kicks off, he has this beautiful dream, and again, it's already said from the beginning. It's a cursed dream. Like he doesn't say planes are great. Planes are cursed. Planes are these weird things that we invent, we use for a lot of different things. Yes, there are noble goals in making transportation and in doing just aeronautics in general, but they're cursed.
Yeah, and then he accepts the planes for what they are because he gets so much joy out of making these wonderful things, just the same way as he accepts their relationship, just knowing that it's not going to end
and
well.
I actually enjoyed that a lot. Like a lot of people, when it comes to sort of moments in time, one of the lines he says is that, when his sister comes and says, "Do you realize how sick she is? Like she's putting rouge on. She's trying her best to keep up appearances." And I like the line he says that every day is precious now, and that he knows, that it's coming. Like he knows, he's well aware that we are on borrowed time, whatever that happens to be. But damn it, if I'm not going to live this to the fullest and do what I have to do. Because ultimately, as damned as it is, like she's his muse. She's his muse to continue making this aircraft, to continue doing this. Like he's had this idea for a while, but it didn't kick in until he went to the hotel and saw her again. He didn't have the design cut. He couldn't make that kind of flying, and so him doing that is. Like it's amazing, like it didn't kick in until that moment.
Yeah.
But now there are some things I didn't like about the film.
Okay.
Damn it if it's not slow. Like damn if it doesn't take a while to kick into where it needs to kick into.
A little bit, yeah.
Like
it did. I mean, it didn't bother me. I kind of like a slow burn, but
I do usually. It just was like, wow, we're taking usually I do. I don't mind that either, but. For me, it took a while to kick into where it needed to kick into. Again, we had to see this guy's life, and I understand that. I think that's what it was that maybe bugged me so much was that it took a while, but it had to like hit the big kind of passage of time moments. Like we saw him as a kid, and then we saw him in college, and then we saw him as an adult, and then that's and then we get everything else at that kind of point in time, and and yes, we see him near the quote unquote end. Of his life, so to speak. And we only get that by the impression of, that he's in his dream sequence and that he's, talking about the fighters not returning. But it took a while until we got, in my opinion, to where the meat of the story was, where, we meet his fiance, later soon-to-be wife, where we meet a lot of these characters that would kick into what would be his thing, because it felt like that was the story where we need to get to, but it took a little bit of time to get. It's not a bad thing, it's not bad that it takes a while. It just takes a little bit longer than I would have liked. But that's like such a minor quib that it's like I didn't like the way that was lit. It's such a weird thing to be annoyed about. But
yeah, I don't think that's an unfair. An unfair criticism. I guess I just saw it as the good suck. You go through that so that way the really prominent like crazy stuff is it really makes that part stand out.
That's a good point. But even then, like it's still fucking gorgeous. It's still beautiful. Like yes, it's slow, but. Like it's almost like, we talk about cinematography all the time in this podcast in general, just because you come from a photography background, you have that idea of how things are set up in lighting and things like that. And so when I see a movie that's animated, it's always hard to talk about it in terms like that, because though the shot's being framed, it's not like let's put this way, let's catch the sun here. It's that no, we drew the sun, we put the colors there and everything else. But watching a lot of this movie reminded me of, it reminds me almost kind of like some French film, sort of the way it's shot. In terms of a lot of, granted, it's Miyazaki, but it felt like this is the first time I can say with his films, it felt a lot more grounded, and it felt a lot. I keep saying real because it's. Let me put it this way: this is the guy that made a giant fur thing named Totoro that it bounced around, and this is the guy that had dragons flying in the sky and moving houses and shit like that. So for him to be talking about an engineer of a fighter plane is a completely departure. And what I like that it did this was that, had anyone else said to me, hey, Robert, do you want to go watch the movie about the creation of this? I go, oh, it's a documentary? Nah, it's a biopic. Well, maybe, But because it was Miyazaki doing that, I'm like, okay, I'm interested now. I'm curious as to what you see. Because usually whenever he does things, it's to show you something. It's to show you either a story, a tale, or to teach you something, or to express something. In Totoro was express sort of youth, and in Ponyo was sort of be this sort of kids for a film for kids that was still imaginative and whimsical. Whereas this feels almost like, yes, you could probably take a kid to it maybe, but this is a very adult film.
Yeah,
and a lot of times with Miyazaki, that's never been the case. Like he's made films for young adults or young teenagers and maybe middle school kids and definitely younger for sure. But he had never really made. I mean, except for one other film that was sort of this sort of dark, kind of fighting kind of thing. It's rare that he's made a film that is adult based. That is, that if you're a kid, you'll see these pretty pictures and things like that. But if you're adult, the story will sink in quicker.
Interesting. Yeah, I can't really speak to that, not having seen many of his other films. But this movie felt very mature in how it was handling the story, even at its most fantastical times.
Yeah, it was very much, again, very grounded, but it still has some whimsy to it. But the whimsy that's there, that I will say, there's a lot of smoking in this film. But again,
there is a lot of.
But that's Japan. Japan has a lot of smoking now, and Japan had a lot of smoking back then. But that's to kind of give you another thing. That's also another trope in Miyazaki films is sort of smoke. Again, he himself is a pretty bad chain smoker in general, but that's neither here nor there. But it's the 20s. It's actually 30s. Sorry, what else are they gonna do? Is just chain smoke before World War II kicks off.
Yeah.
So here's the question: now that you've seen this, and you have seen Spirited Away before, are you interested in seeing the rest of his films, or do you feel that you've now gotten your fill of Miyazaki?
I think, like many films, it would be an ease of access thing. If I could easily see a bunch of his films, I would watch most of them probably.
Okay.
But I'm probably not going to go way out of my way to watch the rest of his films. I feel like this film was probably the one that was most directed at me, so to speak.
Okay. Well, why is curiosity? Why? I mean, I say that from a guy that what is it that this movie spoke to you? That, like, yeah, this was my Miyazaki film, so to speak.
Well, just like that dark, ominous twist to it. I love that stuff. It's so great, and to hear that there are maybe a little accents of that in other movies, but they don't really fully explore that. That was one of the most interesting things about this film to me, and so I'm sure I would love all of his other films, just like I really enjoyed Spirited Away. But I feel like this one was just my pace, just my tone.
Whereas for me, I've seen almost every film he's done. I think, like I said, I've missed one of the films, and I can't even remember the damn title of the film I missed. I feel bad about it. But I've seen My Neighbor Totoro, I've seen Ponyo, I've seen Oscar the Valiant Wind, Poco Rosso, all this stuff. And I think, Poco Rosso might be the most comparison to this film because it has a lot of plain elements and things like that in the film, and it's set kind of in a fantasized version of that world, so to speak, or that time period. Maybe a little bit before, but around that era of flight, so to speak. But though this isn't necessarily my favorite film of his, I'm still very much in the whimsical part of that. In that, I enjoyed the fact that he did the story, and I enjoyed the fact that he took the time to do it, because I could tell just by the way it was animated, framed, and done, that it did come from some place that he'd wanted to do the story. It almost felt like, and that this is something that he wanted to show. And though it may have not been the most popular, and it may have not been the thing he's quote-unquote known for, I'm glad he did it, because I really don't know if this story could have been told that way by anybody else, one, and I don't even think that story could have been told by anybody else, period. Because it's hard to recognize artistry and creativeness in engineering. You know, you never think about how a bridge works per se, or how it was designed by a team, by this guy. You never think when you're in a plane all the inner workings of it. You know, you kind of take a lot of stuff for granted because it's become so much part of our everyday lives. You never think about all the things that go into your car, for example. You just kind of drive it and move on your way. But having a guy that's creative and a guy that has done animation and done things and made gorgeous films, him as a person can see a lot of that and can recognize the artistry in just the designing an engineer. And I really don't think anyone could have done that, because a lot of people would have just brushed that off, would have just gone and concentrated on the plane and some politics and some crap like that. Like, they would have concentrated more on the stuff that really doesn't matter, so to speak, as opposed to concentrating on the man, the life behind him, and the artistry of this plane, and kind of what that means.
Yeah, I think, and then, you know, most people who would think of engineering would go more towards the mathematical, kind of mechanical side of those industries. And yeah, I think he did a really great job of exploring that territory.
For sure. Like I said, it's a fucking good film, and I definitely enjoyed it. We're completely out of time, sir. Plus, it's really freaking cold out here.
It's a brisk 43 degrees.
It's brisk 43
Fahrenheit.
Brent, thank you so much for coming to this film with me. Tell me, find you online.
You can find me online on Twitter at Gatowag. That's GATOWAG. Or you can search for my name, Brant Hughes. Anywhere you can find me.
There you go. Of course, you can find me. I'm at Vincent404 on the Twitters. You want to comment on this podcast, talk about what you thought about The Wind Rises, go to our website, CosmicRadio.TV/cinematography. There you'll find links to other previous episodes and other show notes and things like that. Of course, if you want to let us know what we're doing, we have our Twitter account up there at Cinematalkraphy. And, of course, you can email us at cinematography@gmail.com. We read it very religiously. We watch it. We take suggestions for other films we should check out, other things we should comment on. Whatever you want, we'll definitely read it, as it pertains to this podcast, so to speak.
Yeah, and I mean, if you want to send us stuff that doesn't pertain to the podcast,
that too, as well.
You can do that. Send us a short story or a poem or something.
Yeah, maybe we'll read one on the air if you send it. I'll at least read it.
Yeah.
I may not read it in the air, but I'll at least read it.
Yeah.
So that's it for today, so tune in next time. Bye, people.
Yep.
And that's it.